Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, or welcome if you are new to my channel. So, today we're going to continue with the horror movies from 1980 that I'm reviewing for my overall 1980s horror series. And we're going to take a look at a DVD from my Severin collection, a first time watch for me, and that's the exploitation movie House on the Edge of the Park. So, yeah, House on the Edge of the Park. So, let's just go ahead and get into it here. House on the Edge of the Park is a 1980 English language Italian exploitation horror film written by Gian, Gianfranco Clerci and Vincenzo Manio and directed by Ruggero Diodato, who, of course, directed Cannibal Holocaust, which I reviewed about a week ago for this series. It stars David A. Hess and Giovanni Lombardo Radice as two criminals who infiltrate a posh gathering in a villa and violently turn against the party goers after they mock them. The film is a loose remake of The Last House on the Left, in which Hess also starred. So basically, the film opens. We're introduced to Alex, who's a serial killer driving around New York City at night when he spots a young woman, Susan, driving alongside him. He follows her to a nearby park where he rapes her before strangling her to death. He then takes her locket as a trophy. Sometime later, Alex and his friend Ricky are closing up the underground garage where they both work, planning to go to a local disco. Before they can leave, a Cadillac pulls in with a young, well dressed couple, Tom and his girlfriend Lisa, asking for help with their car. Alex refuses to help them, saying that the garage is closed, but the slow witted Ricky decides to help and easily fixes the problem. Tom tells Alex and Ricky that they are driving to a friend's house in New Jersey for a party and invites them along. Before leaving, Alex stops by his locker filled with various weapons he uses to murder people and takes a straight edge razor. The four arrive at a large villa welcomed by the owner, Gloria, and her friends, Glenda and Howard. Minutes later, it becomes obvious to Alex and Ricky that the rich people are looking for easy thrills. And then the movie goes from there. Um, so yeah, that's the setup and the premise, the beginning of House on the Edge of the Park. As far as the cast goes, we have David Hess as Alex, Annie Beale as Lisa, Christian Bormo- Borromeo as Tom, Giovanni Lombardo Radice as Ricky, Marie Claude Joseph as Glenda, Gabriel De Gilio as Howard, Bridget Petronio as Cindy, Caroline Murdoch as Susan, and Lorraine D. Sell as Gloria. So yeah, that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for House at the Edge of the Park from 1980, directed by Ruggero Diodato. Um, this is an interesting movie. It is very much in the vein of Last House on the Left, which I actually do not own, but I have seen that movie a couple times, the Wes Craven movie. Um, it's not exactly the same movie, of course, but it's kind of in the same vein in terms of the tone and obviously having David Hess be the leader in both movies, you might say, being a psychopath in every sense of the word. So it does sort of remind you of that movie. Um, the thing is, it's kind of hard for me to review this one because I'm not a big fan of exploitation movies, especially ones that are rape and sexual abuse, uh, exploitation movies, which is basically what this is. It's not an overly gory movie. It does have its share of blood and gore in it, mostly from a straight edge razor, but it's mostly the rape and the sex that goes on in this movie, um, sexual abuse and things like that. That's the exploitation part of this movie. So let's just get into it, starting with the things that I liked about House at the Edge of the Park from 1980. You got to start with David Hess. I mean, the guy is just brilliant at playing the psychopath, creepy, almost too on point bad guy that doesn't feel forced or unbelievable. Just the opposite. It feels too authentic and disturbingly realistic. And I don't think David Hess was like this in real life. At least I hope not. But his performance is the best part of the movie, of course. I would say hands down. His character is also the straw that stirs the drink of this movie in every way. I mean, he's the leader. As far as him and Ricky go, um, he's he's the one that's really, even though Ricky's his partner and kind of goes along with him, Ricky is more of like his little brother, if you will. Not really, but kind of like a friend that's a little slow witted, a little slow minded, and he looks up to the David Hess character, Alex, and so. David Hess is the one that's pushing all the boundaries and doing all the things really in this movie, for the most part. So, yeah, the performance by David Hess and the character of Alex is really what this movie is all about. Um, the movie's really unapologetically disturbing, especially more in the way of on-screen violence, sexual assault, and rape. I mean, at one point, there's even a teenage neighbor even comes over, a young girl who I'm assuming is probably 17 or 18. Although the actress in real life was over 20. I checked that out, so there was nothing illegal going on. But she does look like she's 17 or 18, frankly. Um, you know, so I mean, she was older in real life, but played a teenager, and that part is probably the most disturbing, I would say, of all of it, because she's not really, at least she's not playing an adult, and so the sexual assault on her and the attempted rape, the movie really holds nothing back, and we see everything, and I mean everything from a nudity standpoint. Guys, gals, back ends, front ends, tops, bottoms, you name it. This movie doesn't skimp on any of it. So, if that's something that you're into in terms of the nudity, I mean, I know there's people that like sexual exploitation. I'm not one of them, but I'm not one to judge either. But I guess my point is the movie really does know what it is and what it's going for, and it's all unapologetic about it. There's some movies that try to be cutting edge, and it doesn't quite work. This movie definitely doesn't hold anything back. So I'm giving it a pro more from the standpoint it knows what it is and what it wants to do, and I think it succeeds for the most part with that. The movie the movie has a really serious, mean-spirited tone and atmosphere throughout, so you don't have to worry about any real humor or cheesiness here like you get in later '80s movies. It's straight up disturbing and unsettling, even if it takes a little bit to get going once they get to the house. This posh house with these rich people. And then finally, a couple other things. I thought it was interesting to involve these rich snobby folks as opposed to just like some, because these people aren't necessarily that innocent either. They're not necessarily people that you root for, because initially they're kind of treating Alex and Ricky, um, they're kind of using them and abusing them in a way, in a psychological way, not in a physical way, the way that Alex and Ricky would turn the tables on them. But I just thought it was interesting that they sort of added that angle of these upper class, rich, sort of snobby folks that, as an audience member, I really couldn't get behind or relate to. But it definitely made for an interesting dynamic when you have these kind of, not necessarily bad people, but just people you can't get behind. And then you add these two like criminal kind of people, especially one in the case of David Hess's character, and just sort of the interaction with that and sort of the just juxtaposition with all of that. And I thought that was really interesting from a narrative standpoint. I also thought that Alex and Ricky had a pretty good chemistry together, sort of big brother, little brother. I look up to you and I'll take care of you kind of thing. I thought the actors Giovanni Lombardo Radice and David Hess had a good rapport and a good chemistry in that regard as far as these two these two mechanics, these two bad guys. So yeah, those are my pros for House at the Edge of the Park. As far as cons go, as I got into before, the movie really doesn't have any characters to root for or relate to. Because the people that they go after, that they sexually abuse and rape or try to, well, I guess you could say there's a couple characters that aren't you can kind of root for, like the teenage girl who was Cindy, played by Bridget Petronio. She's just at the wrong place at the wrong time, and because she's a teenage girl, didn't really do anything wrong, isn't really part of this rich snobby crowd. You do kind of feel for her. That was the part of the movie that was probably the hardest to watch, just because she really did come across like a teenage girl. So I guess for her, you can feel a little bit. And then the character of Ricky, to a certain extent, as the movie goes on, the back half of the movie. I won't get into why, but if you've seen the movie, you know, and if you haven't, you'll have to watch it. Um, but even with Ricky towards the end, that's a bit of a stretch because of what he was involved in, even though he wasn't the brains behind it or not the leader. But I think it just makes the movie more of a disturbing snuff film than a good narrative film because we can't really relate or get behind a lot of the characters involved here. It's a lot of kind of bad people treating other bad people to bad things, and then the tables get turned, and then they might get turned again. I don't want to give it away, but yeah, I don't know. It's the characters definitely weren't that likable or that easy to relate to here, with the exception of Cindy and maybe Ricky to an extent. The twist that we get towards the end of the movie really doesn't work for me, especially the more I think about it, because why would certain characters allow certain things that end up happening in this movie to happen only to then reveal the reason for them all to get together? It kind of feels like it was tacked on at the end to try to be clever or something. Um, all the fact that it was all sort of being a setup. Come on, man, it's not realistic, and it brings up a lot more questions that can't be answered. So even though they thought they were clever with the twist, and initially there's a scene that happens in this underground garage that kind of makes sense. To kind of help see the twist coming. To kind of like, oh yeah, but then when you really think about it, it's like, really, you let all that stuff happen only to reveal it at the certain point at the end. I'm not going to give you that 100%. I don't. That just didn't work for me. Maybe it works for other people. I get that it's an exploitation movie too, and the twist isn't going to be mind blowing, most likely. Um, let's see. The movie has some pretty choppy editing as well. There's especially an opening scene that the movie gets right to this rape scene where David Hess basically runs this gal off the road and rapes her and strangles her to death. And but there's some bad editing in that scene there that's pretty noticeable. It's a slow paced movie, which isn't the end of the world. Other than that initial scene, then it takes about a half an hour before anything really happens. Um, and it doesn't really have much blood or gore. I mean, this isn't a gory exploitation movie. Yes, there are cuts that happen with the straight edge razor that Alex uses, the character of Alex played by David Hess, but it isn't overly bloody or gory. I wouldn't say there's definitely blood and gore in it, more blood than gore, and a couple of them get peed up pretty bad where they've got bloody faces and stuff, and one of them gets his head rammed into a poker table a few times to get bludgeoned up. But I mean, the exploitation part of this movie is definitely a lot more of the sexual aspect and the rape aspect and the nudity aspect, and again the violent aspect from this with this straight edge razor. So just kind of throwing that out there in case you're a gore hound and you're expecting to see blood and guts. Uh, Obviously, it's not a highly rewatchable movie, I would say, especially for me. This is more of a me thing. I do know there's a lot of people out there that like exploitation movies, even rape and sexual abuse exploitation movies. And again, I'm not here to judge. It's just not really my thing. I'm much more of a fun horror movie kind of fan. I like being scared. I like thinking with like psychological horror, or the cat and mouse game of a good slasher. But when it comes to movies that just are kind of disturbing to be disturbing, and this movie is not necessarily that. It does have a little bit of a through line, even though it's not great, but it's just not a movie that I'm going to rewatch that often. I know I've said that about a few movies that I've reviewed so far for this 1980, the year 1980 is part of my horror series, but it's just not a lot of rewatchability for me. And then my final comment is the score is like, what the fuck with this movie? It doesn't line up with the tone of this movie at all. It's like I don't know how you would describe it. It's like this lighthearted high school song that's being sung by a choir or something, a choir of young people. I don't know, but it's really weird, and maybe they probably chose it on purpose, but I don't think it really fits all that well personally. So yeah, that's those are my cons for House on the Edge of the Park. I keep wanting to say at. I'm getting confused with Last House on the Left. So I'm going to give this movie a 6.5 out of 10. And I'll admit a lot of that has to do with my own personal tastes. But I also don't think, from a technical standpoint, it's that exceptional the way that, like, other movies that I'm not really going to rewatch that much, like even Cannibal Holocaust or don't go into the house. I think those are better made movies from a technical standpoint. Not that this one's horrible. I should also mention the acting outside of David Hess and Giovanni Lombardo Radice isn't that good either, I didn't think. Part of it is the writing of the dialogue and the voiceover, which is not that good, but that's just another con if you want to throw one out there. But 6.5 out of 10 for House on the Edge of the Park. Um, it probably loses 2 points just because it's not my subgenre. But it's like I said, it's also not great from a technical standpoint. And so 6.5 out of 10. Go ahead and comment down below if you guys have seen this movie, what you think of it. Do you like it more than I do? About the same or not? Please like this video, hit the little notification bell, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews for this series um, for another month and a half just for 1980 yet. And any of my other great horror content as well that I have coming out the rest of this year after this series wraps up. So, with that being said, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope you're enjoying this review series. And as always, stay scared. Bye.